In a small village hidden among the rolling hills, there was a tiny home made of straw and mud. Inside, a young man named Leo lived a simple life. Leo was known for his kindness and bravery. Even though he was just an ordinary villager, he loved to explore the nearby forest and dream about adventures in far-off lands. Little did he know that today would bring the adventure he always wished for. One morning, while Leo was collecting berries, he heard a loud rumble. The ground shook beneath his feet, and he turned to see a massive shadow looming over him. He looked up and gasped. A giantess, taller than any tree, was standing before him. She had beautiful long hair that flowed like golden waves and eyes that glimmered like stars. "Help me!" she cried, her voice booming like thunder. "My name is Arya, and I am being chased by soldiers. They want to capture me for their evil plans." Leo's heart raced. It wasn't every day that a giantess appeared in front of him, asking for help. Without thinking, he nodded and shouted, "I'll help you." Before he could finish his sentence, the giantess knelt down. The ground trembled once more, and Leo held his breath. "Thank you, kind human," she said, her smile brightening the cloudy day. "You are brave and noble. What should we do?" Leo felt a strange surge of confidence. He pointed toward the forest, where thick trees could provide cover. "Let's hide there. They won't find us in the woods." Arya nodded, and carefully, she scooped Leo into her hand. He felt a mix of fear and excitement as he was lifted off the ground. She ran toward the forest, her long legs covering the distance in moments. When they reached a dense patch of trees, she lowered him gently onto the ground. As they hid behind a tall tree, Leo could hear the distant sounds of marching boots and clanging armor. The soldiers, a fierce-looking group, were searching for the giantess. Leo watched as they fanned out, looking behind trees and under bushes. He could see that they were determined. "What are we going to do?" Leo asked, feeling the pressure of the situation. Arya thought for a moment and then smiled again. "I have an idea," she said. "I can create a distraction with my magic, but I need your guidance to make it work." Leo felt a rush of responsibility. "What do you need me to do?" he asked eagerly. "Use your voice. When I make the sound, call them over here. They will follow your direction." Arya explained. With a quick nod, Leo prepared himself. He had never been a leader before, but now he had to be one. Arya took a deep breath and raised her hand. With a wave, she created a loud, booming noise like a thunderclap that echoed through the forest. The soldiers stopped in their tracks, looking around in confusion. "What was that?" one of them shouted. "Over here." Leo called out, his voice ringing with determination. "This way." The soldiers turned and began to run towards him, their faces filled with anger and confusion. As they approached, Leo could see the fierce expressions on their faces and the weapons they carried. He felt a flutter of fear in his stomach, but he pushed it aside. Arya, now excited, began to create another distraction. She used her magic to make the trees sway and a gust of wind blow, causing leaves to swirl in the air. The soldiers noticed the movement and looked even more confused. "Let's move," Leo urged. "While they're distracted, we can escape deeper into the forest." Arya nodded and quickly moved to follow him. Together, they dashed away from the sound of the soldiers, deeper into the woods. They ran through the trees, dodging branches and jumping over fallen logs. Leo felt alive, adrenaline coursing through him. After a while, they stopped to catch their breath. Leo leaned against a large tree, his heart racing. "Do you think they are still following us?" he asked, panting. Arya knelt down beside him. "I don't know, but we need to find a safe place to hide until the danger passes," she said, scanning the area. Suddenly, they heard shouting in the distance. The soldiers were still searching for the giantess. Leo's heart sank. "They won't give up, will they?" "No, they will keep searching," Arya said, her eyes narrowing with determination. "But I won't let them catch me. I promise to protect you, too." Leo felt a warm spread in his chest. He had never felt so connected to anyone before. "Let's find a cave or something. Somewhere they can't reach us," he suggested. After a few minutes of searching, they stumbled upon a hidden cave covered in vines and moss. "Here, Leo exclaimed, pointing to the entrance. They hurried inside, and Arya carefully blocked the entrance with a large stone, making sure it was secure. Inside the cave, it was dark but safe. Leo and Arya sat down, catching their breath. She looked at him, her smile returning. "You are very brave, Leo. Thank you for helping me," she said sincerely. "I couldn't just leave you," he replied, feeling proud. "You were in trouble, and I couldn't just stand by." As they sat in the cave, Leo began to feel a strange bond forming between them. He looked up at the giantess, who seemed so powerful yet gentle. "How did you get into trouble with those soldiers?" he asked curiously. Arya sighed and explained. "I was wandering the mountains near my home when they captured me. They want to use my magic for their own plans, but I escaped before they could take me away." Leo nodded, understanding her plight. "You're more than just a giantess," he said. "You're a hero, too." She smiled at him, her eyes sparkling with appreciation. "And you are not just a villager. You saved my life today." Time passed as they chatted, sharing stories and laughter. The sound of the soldiers faded away, and for a moment, Leo forgot about the danger. He felt like a true friend to Arya. Outside the cave, the sun began to set, casting orange and pink hues across the sky. Leo realized they would have to come up with a plan soon. "What will we do when it gets dark?" he asked. Arya thought for a moment. "We will have to find a way to leave this place together. I can create a barrier to protect us, but we must be quick." Feeling a surge of courage, Leo nodded. "Then let's do this. We'll get you to safety." Arya's eyes shone with pride. "Your order, master?" Leo chuckled. "Let's just be partners." Together, they prepared to face whatever came next, ready to embark on their adventure side by side. Two friends united against the threat around them. The dust swirled around Alara, a gritty red that stained the metal walls of his tiny home. He called it a home, but it was more of a reinforced shipping container. He'd managed to burrow into the craggy Martian landscape. Outside, a sea of gleaming chrome stretched as far as he could see. Armies, legions of robotic soldiers stood motionless, their energy weapons reflecting the harsh sunlight like 1,000 burning eyes. Alara, a wiry man with perpetually grease-stained fingers and a shock of unruly brown hair, gulped. He wasn't a soldier nor a leader, not even particularly brave. He was a mechanic, a tinkerer, a scavenger, and now, apparently, the master of an army. It was all because of the giantess. Her name was Lyra, and she was unlike anything he'd ever encountered. He'd found her unconscious amidst the wreckage of a crashed transport ship, buried under twisted metal and sparking wires. Her skin was the color of polished obsidian, and she towered over him, even lying down. He'd estimated her to be at least 12 feet tall. He should have run, reported it to the authorities, or done anything other than what he did. He helped her, driven by a mix of curiosity and a surprising surge of compassion. Alara had spent days nursing her back to health. He rerouted power from his solar panels to keep her warm, scavenged nutrient paste from abandoned outposts to feed her, and even managed to rig up a rudimentary medical system using salvaged drone parts. Lyra was an enigma. She spoke in a language he didn't understand, a series of guttural clicks and melodic hums. But he learned to communicate through gestures, drawings in the dust, and the universal language of sheer hardship. He discovered she was gentle, despite her imposing size. She watched him work with quiet fascination, her large, luminous eyes following his every move. She would sometimes try to help, her massive hands surprisingly delicate as she held tools or stabilized a piece of machinery. Then came the day she woke up fully. The language barrier was still a problem, but her gratitude was clear. She rose to her full height, her head nearly scraping the ceiling of his cramped container home. She looked at him, her gaze intense and unwavering, and spoke a single word imperfect, if heavily accented: Terran, debt. Before Lara could even begin to comprehend what that meant, the ground started to tremble. The armies arrived, pouring over the horizon in a seemingly endless tide of metallic bodies. They surrounded his tiny home, their weapons trained on the entrance. Fear clenched his stomach, but then he saw Lyra stride out container. The robotic soldiers parted before her, their rigid formations dissolving into an almost reverent stillness. Lyra knelt, her massive form dwarfing his humble abode. She looked up at him, her obsidian eyes filled with emotion he couldn't quite decipher. Was it loyalty? Affection? He didn't know. But her next word sent a shiver down his spine. "Your order, master?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. He, Elara, the scrap mechanic, was now seemingly in command of a vast robotic army. He looked at the soldiers, their blank faces impassive, waiting. He looked at Lyra, kneeling before him, her strength and power palpable. He looked at his tiny home, the only sanctuary he had ever known, now surrounded by the instruments of war. Panic threatened to overwhelm him. He was a simple man, not a strategist, not a leader. What did these robots want? What did Lyra expect him to do? Was this some kind of test? A trap? He needed time to think, to understand. "Stand down," he managed to croak, his voice barely audible above the hum of the robot's power systems. "All of you just stand down." Lyra translated his command into her strange, melodic language. The effect was immediate. The robots lowered their weapons, their postures relaxing slightly. The tension in the air eased, but only marginally. They were still there, surrounding him, waiting for his next command. Elara retreated back into the container, his mind reeling. Lyra followed him, ducking her head to fit through the doorway. He sat down heavily on his bunk, staring at the opposite wall, trying to make sense of the impossible situation. "Why?" he asked finally, his voice barely a whisper. "Why are they listening to me?" Lyra tilted her head, her expression unreadable. She pointed to herself, then to him, then made a sweeping gesture that encompassed the entire army. She spoke a few words in her language, then repeated the word det in Terran. He understood then, or at least he thought he did. He had saved her life. He had nursed her back to health. In her culture, that created a bond, an obligation, and apparently that obligation extended to her entire army. "But I don't want an army," Elara protested. "I just want to be left alone." Lyra seemed confused by this statement. She pointed to the desolate landscape outside, then to his meager home. "A lone danger," she said, her brow furrowed. "I protect." He realized then that Lyra wasn't offering him power. She was offering him protection. She saw him as vulnerable, as someone who needed her strength. And, in a way, she was right. He was vulnerable. He was alone. And the Martian landscape was a dangerous place. But he still couldn't bring himself to accept her offer. He didn't want to be responsible for an army. He didn't want to be involved in whatever conflict Lyra was a part of. He just wanted his quiet life back. "There must be something else," he said, desperation creeping into his voice. "Something else I can do to repay this debt." Lyra considered this for a moment, her gaze thoughtful. Then she smiled, a surprisingly gentle expression on her imposing face. She pointed to the sky, then to a complex symbol etched into her armor. "Help, home," she said. "Take me home." Elara looked at the symbol, a series of interlocking geometric shapes that he didn't recognize. He looked at the army surrounding his home, their weapons still lowered, but their presence a constant reminder of the power he now wielded. He looked at Lyra, the giantess who had turned his life upside down, her eyes filled with hope. He knew what he had to do. He had to help her. He had to take her home. Even if it meant leaving his own home behind. Even if it meant becoming embroiled in a conflict he didn't understand. He owed her that much. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. "Okay," he said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "I'll help you. I'll take you home." Lyra's smile widened, and for the first time, Elara saw a glimpse of the warrior she truly was. She stood up, her towering form filling the doorway. She turned to the army and issued a series of commands in her native language. In a land far beyond the stars, there was a tiny planet named Ziller. It was known for its lush green valleys and sparkling rivers. But in this peaceful world, trouble was brewing. Mighty armies, hungry for power, surrounded one small village where a peculiar hero lived. His name was Timo, and he was an ordinary boy with an extraordinary secret. Timo lived in a cozy little home made of yellow bricks. It had a bright blue door, and a small garden filled with roses that danced in the wind. But what made Timo special was not his home or his garden. It was his friendship with a giantess named Alara. She was a magnificent creature, towering over the tallest trees, with long flowing hair that shone like silver under the sun. Alara had come from the distant mountains where she protected the ancient crystals that shimmered with magic. One day, when Timo was exploring the forest, he found her wounded and in need of help. With a brave heart, he cared for her injuries and fed her when she was weak. Day by day, their bond grew stronger, and Alara promised to always protect him. But trouble was coming. Rumors spread that the armies of Grathos, led by the ruthless General Korik, sought to conquer the village of Ziller. They believed they could use the magical crystals to control the entire planet. The villagers were terrified, knowing that no one stood a chance against Korik's forces. They gathered in the town square, whispering fears and plotting ways to escape. Timo knew he had to do something. As the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the skies, he decided to venture out to find Alara. He ran with all his might through the trees, calling her name. Alara! Alara! He shouted, his voice breaking through the noise of the forest. At last, he found her sitting on a hill, looking over the valley. Her blue eyes sparkled as she saw him. "Timo!" she exclaimed, her voice booming, yet warm. "What brings you here?" Timo panted. "The armies. They want the crystals. They are coming for us." Alara's expression grew serious. "We must prepare. You have saved me, and now I will protect our home." She knelt down to meet his gaze, a gentle smile on her face. "What is your order, master?" Timo chuckled, feeling a swell of courage. "We need to gather the villagers and defend our home. We have to plan a way to stop Korik and his army." Alara nodded, her massive form casting a shadow over the tiny boy. Together, they hurried back to the village. The townsfolk were worried, their eyes darting around as they readied themselves for battle. Timo climbed onto Alara's shoulder, the view from up high giving him confidence. "Listen to me," Timo called to the villagers. "The armies are coming, but we will not let them take our home. Alara is with us, and together we can fight." The villagers looked at Alara in awe. Many had heard stories of her strength, but seeing her in person was a different feeling altogether. Her presence filled them with hope. The children cheered and the adults nodded, gaining courage from Timo's words. With only hours before the battle, Timo and Alara devised a plan. They would work with the villagers to set traps throughout the forest. When the enemy arrived, they would be caught off guard. The night was filled with whispers and strategies. Everyone was ready to show their bravery. Finally, dawn broke over Ziller, and the armies of Grathos marched toward the village. Timo stood atop Alara's shoulder, his heart racing. He could see the soldiers, their armor glinting in the sunlight, their expressions fierce. General Korik led the way, a towering figure with a head full of fire and ambition. When the time came, Timo shouted, "Now!" Alara sprung into action, charging toward the army like a mighty force of nature. The villagers followed, throwing dirt and debris. The surprise of Alara's size stunned the soldiers momentarily, but Korik quickly rallied his troops. "Attack!" Korik bellowed, waving his sword. The ground trembled as both sides clashed. Timo felt the fear creeping back, but pushed it away. He had to stay strong for his village. Alara used her strength to push away the enemy soldiers, her giant hands creating barriers that protected the townsfolk. Timo directed the villagers to pull the ropes they had set as traps. With a loud crash, branches fell, ensnaring several of the soldiers. Cheers erupted from the villagers as they realized they were winning. But Korik was not a man to be easily defeated. He shouted orders and summoned his remaining troops to regroup. Timo knew they had to act quickly. He looked to Alara and said, "We can't let them get to the village." Alara nodded and scooped up a large boulder, hurling it toward Korik. The ground shook as it landed near him, startling the general. However, Korik was determined. He pulled out a strange, glowing device from his belt, which began to hum with dark energy. "Everyone be careful," Timo warned, feeling unease wash over him. Korik raised the device, and a brilliant beam of energy shot into the sky. Timo realized it was a weapon, and it was aimed directly at Alara. With quick thinking, Timo yelled, "Ilera, shield yourself." Ilera covered her head with her arms, and the energy beam erupted above her, sending a shockwave across the battlefield. As the dust settled, Timo screamed, "We have to end this!" Timo ran forward, his small form moving with purpose. He climbed down and gathered some of the crystals that had fallen during the battle. "Ilera, use these!" he shouted as he held them toward her. Ilera took the crystals, their glowing light empowering her. With a great roar, she charged toward Korik. Timo felt a surge of energy within himself. He began to shout words of courage that he didn't know he had. "Together, we can win." Ilera raised her hand, the crystals glowing even brighter. She unleashed a wave of their magic, engulfing the army. Korik's device crackled under the force, and he stumbled back in fear. "Flee!" Korik shouted as his remaining army scattered. The villagers cheered, their hearts filled with joy that they had won. Timo stood proudly at Ilera's side, the giantess kneeling once more to meet him eye to eye. "You did it, Timo," she smiled, pride shining in her eyes. "Your bravery saved us." Timo grinned back, feeling a sense of belonging. "We did it together, Ilera. You're my friend and my protector." And from that day forward, Timo and Ilera became legends in Ziller, reminding everyone that even the smallest among US can hold great power when they stand together. The small village flourished, with tales of their adventure told for generations. They knew that no matter what challenges faced them, as long as they had each other, they could overcome anything. The metal son of Xylos beat down on Jebediah's tiny, patched-up house. It wasn't much, just a single room built from scavenged Durasteel and plasticrete. But it was home. He'd lived on this forgotten scrap of planet for 20 years, content in his solitude, fixing broken tech and trading with the occasional passing freighter. Until today. Today, his peace was shattered. Looking out of his reinforced window, Jebediah saw them, rank upon rank of soldiers, clad in the black and silver of the KRYLL Imperium. Their laser rifles glinted menacingly, and their armored transports hummed with barely contained power. They surrounded his home, a perfect circle of hostile intent. Jebediah swallowed hard. The KRYLL were conquerors, known for their brutality and their insatiable hunger for resources. What did they want with him? He was just a nobody, a speck of dust on a forgotten world. Then the ground shook. A shadow fell over his house, eclipsing the harsh Xylo sun. Jebediah craned his neck, his heart pounding in his chest. Towering over the KRYLL soldiers, dwarfing even their largest transports, was a figure of immense size and power. It was a giantess. Her skin was the color of polished obsidian, and her eyes glowed with an inner light. She wore intricately crafted armor that seemed to shimmer and shift with every movement. Jebediah recognized the armor's design. It was ancient, pre-KRYLL, forged by a race thought to be long extinct, the Xyloshan Titans. And she was kneeling before his house. The giantess lowered her massive head, her gaze fixed on Jebediah's window. A voice, deep and resonant like the rumbling of a volcano, echoed across the desolate landscape. "Your order, master." The KRYLL soldiers froze, their disciplined ranks momentarily disrupted by shock and confusion. Their weapons wavered, their faces pale beneath their helmets. They were warriors, bred for conquest, but they were clearly terrified of the giantess. Jebediah felt his legs weaken. He stumbled back, knocking over a stack of spare circuit boards. He couldn't understand it. This couldn't be happening. He remembered the day he found her, trapped beneath a collapsed structure on the far side of the planet. He'd been scavenging for parts when he heard a faint, rhythmic thumping. Curiosity overriding his caution, he'd followed the sound and discovered the giantess, buried alive. She was much smaller than, no bigger than a large transport. Injured and weak, she'd been unable to free herself. Jebediah, using his meager tools and his knowledge of ancient Xyloshan architecture, had managed to dig her out. He'd expected gratitude, perhaps a swift departure, more likely. He hadn't expected her to imprint on him, to declare him her master. He'd tried to dissuade her, explaining that he was just a simple mechanic, not a leader or a warrior, but she wouldn't listen. She insisted that he had saved her life, and that she was now bound to serve him. He'd named her Terra. For weeks, she'd followed him around, a silent, watchful guardian. He'd taught her what he could about the modern galaxy, about the KRYL Imperium and the dangers of Xylos. He'd shown her how to repair his equipment, and she'd learned with astonishing speed. He'd even started to feel comfortable with her presence. Then, a week ago, she had disappeared. She'd simply vanished without a word, leaving Jebediah to wonder if he'd imagined the whole thing. Now, she was back, bigger and more powerful than ever, commanding the attention of an entire army. Jebediah took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. He looked at the KRYL soldiers, their fear palpable even through their armor. He looked at Terra, her eyes filled with unwavering loyalty. He knew he had a choice to make. He could hide, pretend he didn't know her, and hope the KRYL would eventually leave. But he knew they wouldn't. They were too thorough, too relentless. They would tear apart his home, his life, in their search for whatever they were looking for. Or he could embrace this impossible situation. He could use Terra's power to protect himself, to maybe even make a difference. The thought terrified him, but also intrigued him. He stepped forward, his hand trembling as he reached for a control panel that opened his front door. The door hissed open, revealing Jebediah to the KRYL army and their giantess commander. Every eye was on him. He forced himself to stand tall, to project an air of confidence he didn't feel. He looked at Terra, her massive form radiating power. "Terra," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "What's going on? Why are these people here?" Terra turned her gaze towards the KRYL soldiers. Her expression hardened. "They trespass, Master. They seek to claim what is yours." A KRYL officer, his face pale but determined, stepped forward. "We are here under the authority of the KRYL Imperium," he announced, his voice amplified by a vocoder. "We have detected an energy signature emanating from this location. We believe it to be a source of significant power. We demand that you surrender it to us immediately." Jebediah frowned. "Energy signature? I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just a mechanic." The officer sneered. "Do not insult our intelligence. Human, we know you are harboring something of value. Surrender it now, and we may spare your life." Jebediah looked at Terra. She remained kneeling, her eyes fixed on him, waiting for his command. He knew that she could obliterate the entire KRYL army with a single blow, but he also knew that such an act would bring the full might of the Imperium down upon them. He needed to be smart. He needed to buy time. "I told you," Jebediah said to the officer. "I don't have anything. But if you want to search, be my guest. Just be careful. This place is a bit of a mess." The officer hesitated. He glanced at Terra, then back at Jebediah. He clearly didn't trust him, but he also didn't want to provoke the giantess. "Very well," the officer said. "We will search your dwelling. But be warned, human. If we find anything you're hiding, you will pay the price." He gestured to a squad of soldiers. "Search the house. Leave no stone unturned." The soldiers advanced, their laser rifles raised. They approached Jebediah's house cautiously, their eyes darting nervously between him and Terra. As the soldiers entered his home, Jebediah turned to Terra. "Terra," he whispered, "I need you to trust me. Don't do anything unless I tell you to. Understand?" Terra nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "As you command, Master." Jebediah took a deep breath. He had no idea what he was doing, but he knew he had to protect himself and Terra. He had to figure out what the KRYL wanted and why they thought he had it, and he had to do it fast. Because the KRYL were searching his home, and he had a feeling they were about to find something he didn't even know he possessed. The fate of Xylos, and perhaps the entire galaxy, might just depend on a humble mechanic and the giantess he saved.